Okay. Um, Hi, everybody. My name is Stephen Waddy, and I'm the Political Action Chair for the Anne Arundel County branch of the NAACP. I want to thank you for tuning into this hour-long discussion on policing in Anne Arundel County schools. The impetus for this discussion was based around many conversations that have been occurring within communities in Anne Arundel County regarding the school-to-prison pipeline and policing in the schools. As we've seen since the uh, death of George Floyd, we had mass protests spring up throughout Anne Arundel County, the largest protest movement in the history of the county. And there were demands that were made, especially those regarding civilian review of police activities and reduction uh, in policing around the county, some issues around racial profiling, issues around stop and frisk, issues around uh, the use of no-knock warrants and chokeholds, most specifically. We even have seen a case pop up regarding the same restraint that was used on George Floyd, where the knee on the neck restraint was used. And we've had some more recent issues regarding the discipline of police officers in that case. And in that vein, another issue that has popped up is the use of school resource officers in Anne Arundel County schools. The use of school resource officers has been a discussion that started before George Floyd. We've had many articles. The NAACP actually sued the school system back in 2005 regarding some civil rights issues, including the disciplinary actions that resulted in the discipline affecting Black students more than any other race. And that also was included in the most recent joint initiative report that came out of the school system and the county government. So as initially described by education advocates, including the NAACP, the school to prison pipeline was created in response to what was occurring in states that used the test scores of third graders to determine the number of prison beds that will be built, just indicating the connection between education and prisons. Tonight, we will hear about zero tolerance policies, mass incarceration, suspensions, learning and behavioral disabilities, and some of the bills to address these issues that are being heard in the Maryland legislature during this session. This is just an initial discussion. I hope we can continue to have these discussions in the future. Just want to introduce some of our panelists. We have Ellen Goodman Duffy. Ellen Goodman Duffy was recently appointed acting deputy district public defender for Anne Arundel County. Prior to that, she was the chief executive of the juvenile division for 14 years. During that time, the practice of juvenile defense expanded and evolved nationally and locally, moving from the limited work of litigating criminal charges to the holistic defense of children. She is wholly committed to making the juvenile justice system more sensitive to the nature of youth and more just in its treatment of them, commitment she intends to bring to her new position. We have Raleigh Turnage. Many of you know Brother Turnage. He is a member of the NAACP. He grew up from humble beginnings in Cherry Hill in South Baltimore. His journey in education afforded him extensive experience in special education. He advocates and fights for children and juveniles who are at a disadvantage as a result of their special needs. He has a track record of teaching children of all ages, and Raleigh has been a resident of Anne Arundel County for 45 years, is a major contributor to causes near and dear to his heart, such as social justice and human rights. He's married, father of one daughter and two sons, the grandfather of one daughter and three grandsons. He has a master's degree in special education from Coppin State, worked for 6 years as a special education teacher, then becoming assistant principal before becoming a principal of the Charles Hickey Junior School from 2005 to 2012, amongst many other accolades and educational achievements. We have Harold Lloyd. Harold will have to leave us early, unfortunately, in this meeting, but I appreciate him joining us. Harold is a recent graduate of Frostburg and a product of Broadneck High School. He's also he was recently elected president of the Anne Arundel County Youth and College Division. And he needs memberships. So if you all want to join the Youth and College Division, please speak with Harold or get Harold's information. All right. And we have Monisha Sharil. Monisha came to the Public Justice Center in 2009 as a Francis Murnahan Appellate Advocacy Fellow and currently practices as a staff attorney in the Public Justice Center's Education, Stability, and Workplace Justice projects. Her accomplishments include helping to launch the Maryland Suspension Representation Project, a statewide effort to provide free legal representation to students facing disciplinary removals from school, securing settlements to recover unpaid wages and damages on behalf of classes of restaurant workers, construction workers, roadside flaggers, and other low-wage employees, and successfully advocating for legislation to allow unaccompanied homeless youth to pursue college tuition free. Her practice reflects a commitment to the Public Justice Center's model of enforcing and expanding the rights of oppressed individuals while pursuing systemic change. All right, so we also have Mary Dodoni, who is the chair of the education branch. Mary and I have had several discussions around this issue on school resource officers. The NAACP has not taken a position on that issue yet. So that is one of the reasons why we want to have this community discussion and to speak with some of the panel of experts that we have on this panel to be able to understand some of the issues around that. And Mary, if you have any questions or any thoughts that you want to chime in, please don't hesitate to speak up, and I definitely appreciate you joining us as well.
Will do. Thank you, Mr. Waddy.
Okay, so I want to hear first from a now standpoint, Monisha, if you can give us a update, I guess, on some of the legislative issues and policy going on at the state legislature. We have, I guess, 5 bills or 4 bills that are associated with school resource officers and the use of them. If you can give us a kind of background on the issue of school resource officers and where they are now and where the bills are and what they kind of mean.
Sure, and thank you so much, Stephen and Anne Arundel County NAACP for inviting me to speak today. I'm really honored to be here with you all talking about this important issue. With respect to sort of where we are with the law, let me just start by saying that Maryland has state law that requires every single public school in our state to have either a school resource officer or adequate law enforcement coverage in its schools. And it puts $10 million per year in mandatory state funds towards SROs. There's a SRO fund at the state level that gets $10 million per year disseminated down to police departments and school districts, actually primarily police departments, so they can put school resource officers in schools. And I also want to be very clear that when we talk about the definition of school resource officer, we really are talking about law enforcement. You look at the definition in the code, a school resource officer is a police officer. It is defined as a law enforcement officer, simply one that is stationed at a school. I think folks sometimes have the impression that there's sort of different obligations or powers or other aspects that distinguish SROs from law enforcement. But in fact, these folks have all the powers and obligations of all law enforcement, including the power to arrest, to handcuff, to interrogate, to carry firearms. Okay, so that's very important. And these are the folks that are in our children's schools. And as for training, the SROs do get a bit of additional training beyond what other officers get. It's about 1 week. It's about a 1 week survey course in sort of a smattering of topics related to schools and kids. It's not sort of the types of intensive years-long training that counselors and social workers would get. So I just want to be really clear when we think about the law, that is what an SRO is. So that's the current law. Now, there's been, as you suggested, for years, conversations going on about whether this is really the right model. The school resource officer model has expanded in the state and nationwide over the course of the past 20 years. It originated actually at the time that schools were integrating, in part as a reaction and a response to integration, in the sense that there was a need to police Black students that were now entering previously white schools. And then, of course, it expanded further following Columbine and other school shootings. But the conversations have really been around whether this is an effective model, because we now have, 40 plus years of research showing that SRO presence simply hasn't had the intended effect of keeping schools safe. There are, extensive studies that have really tried to look at, is police presence in schools preventing school shootings? Are they stopping school shootings once they begin? Are they reducing any other kinds of violence or inappropriate conduct on school campuses? And they're not. That was the hope, that was the intent, and universally, this mounting body of research has not found that to be the case. What instead the effect seems to be is to increase arrests of students, of young people, for the kinds of behaviors that young people tend to engage in because they're kids, because they're young. So in Maryland, in the last school year for which we have data, 2018-19, we had 3,141 arrests. About 70% of those were for offenses like fights not involving weapons, disruption, property destruction, a lot of the run-of-the-mill behaviors that adolescents.
Are you seeing bills? Are your
in.
bills popping up that are addressing these issues?
Yeah. And I'm sorry, I just wanted to set that context so folks have an understanding of why there's a conversation happening. And I can talk more about that. But in terms of the bills, there's two bills. So the Public Justice Center is working within a broad coalition of about 90 plus orgs called the Maryland Coalition for Justice and Police Accountability. And we, the coalition is pushing sort of a number of police reform demands, including to really get police out of our schools and reinvest in student mental health services, wraparound supports, and restorative approaches, which have been shown to actually make schools safer, and in a way that doesn't pull kids, towards prison. So the two bills that we're supporting as sort of companion bills to achieve this aim are House Bill 1089. This is sponsored by Delegate Gabriel Acevedo. It's actually got its hearing next week before Ways and Means on March 3rd. And it's being called the Police Free Schools Act. And the companion bill is House Bill 496. And that is the Counselors Not Cops Act, sponsored by Delegate Janelle Wilkins. It had its hearing earlier this month. 1089 takes two major steps. It shifts our $10 million state SRO fund away from school policing and towards mental health services, wraparound supports, trauma-informed practices, allows districts to hire more counselors, social workers, psychologists, given that most of the districts currently fall quite short on the recommended ratios there. the second piece, the second element that it includes is it actually goes ahead and says, look, schools cannot contract with police departments to regularly station officers in their schools. It doesn't, they can still call them in an emergency. They can still have unarmed guards on site if they wish, so long as they don't have arresting powers. But they cannot have those officers, patrolling their hallways and their playgrounds every day as they are now. And then the second bill, Janelle Wilkins' bill, really just includes that first element. So the funding shift from the $10 million SRO fund, shifting that towards the mental health services and wraparound supports that really are best proven to improve behavior and make schools safe. So those are the two bills we're supporting. There are two other pieces of legislation that have been introduced. One is House Bill 522. This was introduced by Delegate Alonzo Washington. He's introduced this bill a few years now. What it does is it simply says that SROs shouldn't be involved in routine disciplinary matters. The PJC and a number of our partners ended up, Delegate Washington is a tremendous ally in a lot of issues related to education and restorative justice. We did file a letter of information on this bill and just let him know that that most districts, including in fact Anne Arundel County, already have sort of policy on their books that say that SROs aren't supposed to be involved in discipline, and yet the concerns we see persist, and that's simply because if a kid gets in a fight, or if a kid talks back or is loud, I would call that a disciplinary issue that should be handled by educators.
I hear you. I want to hear from Brother Turnage about that, especially if I don't know, Monish, if you want to finish up, or Mrs. Turnage, what kinds of behaviors would put a child at risk of removal from school or the classroom?
Well,
in your experience.
Yes. You mentioned my background earlier. I do have a master's degree in special ed. I have served as a special needs teacher, as well as a special needs assistant principal and a principal in a comprehensive school. So one of the things that concern me greatly is the fact that many of the school resource officers are not trained to handle students with special needs. They do not understand what their issues are. They don't understand that if a child is ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADD, attention deficit disorder, or have an autism spectrum, they don't understand what kinds of behaviors come with these situations. And it's easier for that officer to look at a kid who's, in his mind, seems to be totally out of control and put handcuffs on him. And then the next thing you know, you start that school to prison pipeline. One of the things that, in my opinion, that needs to happen is that I understand that they also get some kind of training, but it's very limited, 40 hours over a period of a school year, which is not nearly enough. They should be trained with the educational staff when they are trained to understand what these disabilities and situations that happen with these kids really are, and so they know how to interact with the kids.
Ms. Turnage,
yes.
How often did you see in your experience undiagnosed disability or a child that may have had special needs, falling into your lap at the Hickey School?
Well, the Hickey School is a school for kids that have been adjudicated by the courts. These kids are there signed by the courts because of their behaviors. Now, I would say on average, 60 to 85% of the kids that are located at the Hickey School on any given day has an active school IEP, which is an individualized education plan that all kids need to have. So there's a direct correlation between these kids being detained in a juvenile facility and their diagnosed disabilities that they have. And I think part of that, the reason why many of these kids are detained in these facilities is because when these school resource officers or police officers or whomever get involved with these students in a particular school, because they don't understand this child's disability, because they don't understand what they're dealing with at all, it's easier for them to cuff these kids and, and place them under arrest, as opposed to locating a school social worker or a school counselor or a school psychologist to intervene on behalf of the student. Even if handcuffs are placed on the kid, doesn't necessarily mean the child is being arrested. It could just mean they're trying to get the situation under control. Once that happens, then it needs to be turned over to school personnel to decide whether or not that behavior was a manifestation of that child's disability or not. And if it is, then there's some other corrective measures that need to take place other than detaining and arresting a student. You do a child a very real bad disservice by arresting a kid who has a diagnosed disability of some disorder that he cannot control, even with medication in some cases. So I would then suggest that, number one, school resource officers are selected properly. You don't want to take a beat cop who's used to busting kids' heads in the street and put him in a school, because the same behavior that he exemplified or delivered in the street is going to take place in the school building. Number two, that training that was mentioned earlier about the 40 hours a week should be ongoing, as when teachers are provided professional development in their particular disciplines, and especially when it comes to classroom management and school behavior throughout, these officers should also participate in that training. And number three, they should always be visible in the school and present themselves as somebody who's student friendly, who really wants to let them know that he's there for their protection and not to beat them upside the head. And of course, number four, the most important reason why you even have school resources officers in the buildings are to present any kind of mass casualties or situations that happen in a school, like a school shooting or fires or a riot and that sort of thing. So there are many different reasons in my particular situation for it. I would not go along with House Bill, what was that?
All right. Hold on now, Mr. Turner.
245. Yeah.
I got you.
Okay.
I just wanted to move to Ms. Goodman Duffy real quick and get a perspective on how you see children that are removed from classrooms for things like disturbing school operations in their addressing of quote unquote misbehavior. Hold on. You're on mute.
Okay. I think that the proliferation of SROs, as well as some of the laws that catch kids in school and bring them into the court system, suffer from the same problem, which is trying to deal with a very complex issue of adolescence in a simple way. And what we see, there are three ways that we primarily see kids come into the juvenile justice system. And just in terms of background, I can tell you, I've been in charge of the juvenile defense unit of the Public Defender's Office in Anne Arundel County for 14 years. We handle more than 90% of juveniles who come through the juvenile justice system in Anne Arundel County, and we also represent juveniles who are charged as adults in Anne Arundel County. So all of these kids pass through our office on the way to the court system and beyond. And three things that we've seen that sort of fuel the pipeline from school to prison are the law disturbing school operations, and I know there's a bill pending to change that law, but it's sort of a catch-all law. It's in the education code, and it's unfortunately as broad as it sounds, disturbing school operations. If a child does anything that diverts an administrator or teacher from their normal business, then they can be charged with disturbing school operations. And we see that charge used a lot. The other thing is there are what are called reportable offenses, which were part of the Safe Schools Act. And reportable offenses allow schools to put out kids who commit crimes in the community. So you get in a brawl in your neighborhood and get charged with a second-degree assault, and you can be deemed a danger to the children in your school and put out of school. And this happens really without much ado, virtually no due process on a regular basis. During 2018-19, there were 125 kids put out of school that way for things that did not occur in school. And then the third layer of it is SROs. And as Manisha said, they are police officers. If you look at the regulation that establishes them, the first thing it says is that they're police officers. That's their primary purpose and goal. And so being police officers, they do what police officers do. They're not they talk about mentoring and education and all of these things, but that's not really what they're trained to do. And so you have the same old problem, you know, if you're walking around with a hammer, all you see is nails. And if you have police officers in school, you know, what you see is crimes being committed as opposed to disciplinary issues, as opposed to the manifestation of a special education need, as opposed to, you know, a reaction to trauma that's occurring at home, and the myriad other things that young people have to deal with. And so in all these instances, what we're doing is we're treating a very complex problem, that of a human being growing up, developing, you know, with simple solutions in an effort to make things safer. You know, the goal's a good goal, but in order to make things safer, again, as Manisha said, we have to start with, you know, the children. We have to be more holistic. I mean, all the research shows that. And so I don't think that it particularly helps to give a police officer a 1-week course in mental health, but it would certainly help to have more mental health services in the school provided by professionals who are trained to do that. You know, I work one-on-one with kids. I'm not an expert at all in policy, but what I see is kids with diagnosed and undiagnosed mental health and developmental disabilities who get caught up in the system because they haven't been appropriately diagnosed, or they're diagnosed but they don't have appropriate treatment, and they become problematic in the classroom. And so this is an easy way, you know, to get them out. And these simple solutions sort of bleed into areas where they really shouldn't be used. I mean, I've had 11-year-olds arrested in school for making, you know, a threatening comment to another 11-year-old. You know, a 9-year-old hauled out of school for a second-degree assault, you know, pushing, shoving, nothing serious. I had recently this really interesting young man who was arrested in school for he had a box of Cheerios in his homeroom class, and the administrator felt that it was going to be disruptive, and it developed into this back and forth, and the Cheerios eventually ended up all over the floor. So you have disturbing school operations. So it's all these kind of normal things that could easily be resolved in other ways that end kids up in the juvenile justice system. And just because it's something that silly doesn't mean that they won't be put on probation or they won't be sent to a juvenile facility. Because of course there are underlying issues which immediately come to the surface when they get to the juvenile justice system. And those become another reason to—
Have you seen, in terms of family dynamics, you know, that playing a role in some of the issues that some of the students that you've seen come through, or even being able to provide services for them through it within the school system?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, a lot of the young people we represent come from homes where there's a single parent, where there are financial difficulties, where maybe there's not as much education as to what's available, or maybe not a sophisticated understanding of what mental health treatment would look like, whether it's something that would be good or not. And to the extent that we could deal with those in an educational setting, I think that would be better. But I mean, a lot of those things are barriers to getting what they need at home. And then, unfortunately, the juvenile justice system tries to give it to them in a.
I see a lot of
facility.
heads nodding in the, from our panel.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you guys want to speak up about that, I have no problem. If you have a comment about that, or any of the topics that we've been talking about. Harold, I know you've, becoming the president of the NAACP, you've seen all of these videos of young children being tossed and broken legs. School resource officers breaking people's legs and arms. You've seen the reports of 9-year-olds being 6-year-olds being put in handcuffs by school resource officers. And I'm just wondering if you feel like there's been an impact in terms of how these stories and are seen, not just from the practitioner standpoint, but also from being, a young person that's in the schools, recently graduated.
Yeah, so since I'm still kind of since I'm 22 years old, I was just in the school system 5 years ago. So I witnessed it firsthand, and I always had an issue with it. Especially because I always felt as though they got a little bit too much credit. Because most of the altercations that I've seen, I've always witnessed either another student breaking it up, a teacher breaking it up, an advocate breaking it up, or administrator breaking it up. It was very rare that I witnessed the SRO break it up. And issue is that we have 3 SROs, and a school is really big. So by the time the situation is de-escalating, the only thing they're good for at the point is just to lock an individual up, whoever they believe that escalated. And I always felt as though that solution was reactive and not proactive, and there was no real plan with that. So that's how I always felt as though, and my peers felt the same way. We always say, wow, we come to school, we go to our same classes, and we're getting watched by police officers all day. And then everybody will make the jokes like, this is like prison. And in our minds, we're just joking. But in reality, no, the school systems were really functioning in the same way as prison. And, since the SROs are kind of police officers, but they're not police officers, it's kind of like how a correctional officer wasn't a real police officer, but how they oversee the whole building, and they have the authority to pretty much put sanctions on students and all this type of stuff. So we always were against it. And I think that was always an issue, was that all of the adults had their opinions, their sentiments. They always said how they felt. And, you'll have like 60 saying they're against it, 40 saying they're for it. So it's always people bumping their heads. But it was never a time where the students were asked about their opinion. And I think that should be a real solution, is that, school systems should survey these kids. And how do you feel about SROs? Do you think that you need them in school? And I'm sure that the results would say otherwise, because, I mean, I never heard in my life, thank goodness the SRO was here for that. So me personally, that was one of the main reasons why I was against it, because of their reactive ways of moving and not proactive ways of moving.
Go ahead, Riley.
Yeah, I just want to address. I just wanted to address the statement that Harold just made. There's a young lady who's with the Anne Arundel County Police Department by the name of Tamika Perkins, who has started a diversion program, and it will do exactly what you feel, Harold, that's not being done. One of the things that will come out of this particular program is that SROs will become part of the instructional process. They will go into the classrooms, have conversations with the students, talk to them about their particular issues, about what they considered criminal acts and or not, explain about policing and the laws and that sort of thing, which will help clear the air in terms of how you as a student feel about what this guy's job and position really is in school. And his job is, even though he's a sworn police officer, he has all the duties and powers and responsibilities as a sworn police officer. He's also there as an advocate and a mentor, somebody that you can talk to, somebody hopefully you can develop a trust with, and that sort of thing, as opposed to feeling that this guy is coming around with a hammer to knock you upside the head, that your head is the nail, that was spoken about Mrs. Duffy. So right now, things are beginning to change in Anne Arundel County, and it may become a statewide model at some point that could be used, because there are many different components to this new process, this diversion program that's being done. There's a teen court process that's being implemented with this, where the teens get to hear the various cases or complaints about a student's behavior. They get to try this particular student. And there are other ways of communicating with these SROs, as well as the school administration and students, to make everybody feel comfortable with that school resource officer being in the building. He's not there primarily to handle your basic cutting class disciplinary issues. That's a school administrator's job. But in the event there should be a real serious altercation or a real serious problem going into schools, like somebody bringing a weapon in with the intent to do something, or setting fires, or doing other things that are really create a very dangerous situation, that's his real job. But like I asked before, made the statement before, there should be a lot of consideration given to the selection process of an SRO going into a school. He has to have a certain level of a certain type of temperament to be there.
Riley, let me get Ms. Goodman Duffy, and then Monisha.
Okay.
So I just wanted to say that a couple things. One is that the school safety section of the I guess the police manual, and this one's dated 2016, laying out the duties of the SRO, does say, number 3, serve as a counselor, mentor, and educator for students in his or her assigned school. So that was contemplated to be part of the SRO's job, but I don't know that that's happening, but that's been in place for a long time. In terms of the diversion programs, the teen court has been around for many years, and I think it is an effective program. The other diversion programs they're talking about now, one is community conferencing. The Partnership for Children, Youth, and Family has a community conferencing program. It was set up as part of what was originally disproportionate minority contact, addressing disproportionate minority contact. And it's been unfortunately underutilized by schools. So the police department is starting that now, but there has been one for years. You know, they were trained to do mediation in any setting, and then including schools. And then the third thing is there is a third program, and I don't really know a lot about that, called the Joins program that Ms. Perkins testified about at the hearing the other day. But I guess my point is that a lot of these things have been sort of on the books for a while, but they're they're easy talking points, but I haven't really seen them effectively save people from the juvenile justice system or get them out.
Well, I think it's up to the school.
Let me hear from Monisha real quick. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. So I just wanted to speak to the point about sort of the mentorship role. It's absolutely true that there's some individual officers that have terrific relationships with individual students. And I don't think what any of us is saying is that this is primarily an issue of, bad cops or ill-intentioned individuals. It's really about the model. And I'll give you an example of a client who was hoping to be here tonight, but she couldn't. So this is a sixth grader in Anne Arundel County Middle School, in a middle school in Anne Arundel County, who I represented, PJC represented last school year. just before the shutdown. She had never been in trouble before. And she had an SRO in her school. She actually had a great relationship with this guy. She talked about, he was friendly with her. They'd give each other fist bumps in the hallways. So he did have that kind of relationship you're describing, and that a lot of folks cite as an important reason to kind of keep the programs. But she's 12 years old. She's getting into, the very common back and forth with an on and off again friend of hers, right? And they've been having some tensions. It's been building up a little bit, and they didn't necessarily have the counselors in the school. There were sort of justice practitioners that could help them de-escalate, figure out how to resolve it in a productive way. And they did end up getting in a shoving match, right? Again, nothing serious, just the fights that probably many of us adults here at one point got into as kids ourselves, because that is what kids do. But she got arrested by her SRO, and she pointed out to me, and this was a very difficult experience for her. She has to go through the juvenile justice process, or her mom's missing work. They're navigating this complicated system. She's never been in trouble before, so this is particularly scary, and it's particularly galling to her and hurtful to her that this happened in her school, and that it happened even with an officer who liked her, who knew her, who had sort of that mentoring relationship. And what really sticks with me, she said, he told me after this arrest, don't worry, this doesn't change anything. And her mind is like, what are you talking about?
Oh, yes, it
He just
does.
treated me like a criminal. Of course it changes everything. And at the end of the day, it's not because he's a bad guy. And it's not even because he wasn't doing his job right. It is because he was doing his job. His job is to view the actions of kids through the lens of the criminal law. And so that shoving match, he didn't see as a kid screwing up who needs some help, resolving a conflict, but as a incident that needs to be dealt with through law enforcement. And that changed everything for her.
And the problem is that is technically a crime.
Yeah.
So not one that you would usually be prosecuted, but it is because there's a police officer there.
We got a question that was asked by Secretary Monique Brown. So in the event a student is charged because of an incident that happened at school, let's say the second-degree assault, what are their options? What happens to their record? Are there options for the record from the police side and beyond?
The juvenile, all juvenile records are confidential, which means that you can't pull them up on Maryland Judiciary Case Search, but you can get to them with a court order.
No.
And all juvenile records can be sealed at the age of 21. Again, that means that they're not easily accessible, but you can get to them with a court order. The real damage that they do for kids is if you get involved in the adult system later, they'll come back to haunt you.
Well, and just two more things to add to that. The juvenile records, one, if you get into minor trouble one time, like my client Leilani, if it happens again, that much more likely that you end up with an even more severe consequence, with detention or something else. The other piece is you've got to report these. Colleges ask about these records routinely. Jobs ask about these records routinely. And so we've definitely had youth we're working with where that's the biggest concern for them, right? It might be a sealed record, but now they're not going to lie in their college application. And now that's a black mark against them. And then I'll also say, we forget, but I certainly have a lot of clients who are seniors in high school and they've just turned 18, and it doesn't matter.
How many of them are Black?
Oh, that's a great question. I have had, in terms of students who have been arrested in school, I have had no students who are white, almost 100% Black, a couple Latino. And that aligns, by the way, with the stats. So statewide, 56% of school-based arrests involve Black students, even though they're only about a third of our student population. In Anne Arundel County specifically, the figure is 54% of arrests, even though they're only 21% of the student population. So it's even worse. in Anne Arundel County.
And how many of them are boys?
I'm sorry, I didn't
Do
hear
we know
you.
how many boys, black boys there are? Are they all, is it gender? Is there a gender
Yeah,
dynamic?
It's majority male, but
Mhm.
it always has been.
Steve.
And go ahead, Riley.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I say the training of SROs is critical, and the laws may need to be tweaked in order to allow for some of this not to happen the way it happens. Just like Mrs. Duffy mentioned just a minute ago, and also, how do you pronounce your name, Mrs. Manisha? Your last name?
Yeah, Chariel.
Jariel. Okay, as they both stated, these are laws on the books that the police officers will enforce. And so if they have that as a tool, they're going to use it. Not that it should be used, because in many of those cases, and probably in most of those cases, had they had somebody there who was a social worker or mental health experience or a special educator, that resource officer could have approached about this particular child instead of placing this child under arrest and letting these other people intervene in the situation, those numbers may be drastically reduced so that these kids do not become part of this school to prison pipeline. That's the whole issue. And once this happens with a kid, once they get that label, it is something that sticks with them. And it doesn't do much to help them control their behaviors anymore, because they already feel they're already, being judged negatively. And it's just going to continue with them no matter what they do or say.
Mary, I know you weren't probably expecting, but did this come up much during the joint initiative? Well, we're talking about policy. I want to hear. I want to know if you had this discussion during the issue of the joint initiative to eliminate the opportunity gap.
Right.
Where we talked
There
about
was a discipline committee, and I'm sorry I wasn't on that subcommittee. So
I was.
Oh,
okay.
hi, Alan. So you can answer this question. So I was over on systemic racism, and we took a broader view on systemic racism. We really harked back to that 2005 lawsuit and said, we need to look at this constantly. It has to be an ongoing issue, an ongoing point of examination. That's all I can contribute. Over to you, Ms. Goodwin-Duffy.
So, well, I was on that committee. The committee unfortunately sort of lost steam, but it did address SROs. It did address reportable offenses. I'm not sure about the disturbing school operation.
You said the committee didn't address SROs?
It did.
Oh,
it did.
Okay.
It's in the report.
Okay.
The other thing I think that's important is that it's sort of a slippery slope. The NEACP Foundation did a report. It's like probably 2000. It's a little bit. It's probably 2013 now. I can't remember, but they did a report on commitments across the state, and what they found was that the commitments were disproportionately Black. So the arrests are disproportionately Black. Then those kids come into the court system and they are disproportionately placed in juvenile facilities. And it was, I can't remember the percentage, but it was particularly true in Anne Arundel County. I think we were sixth among counties statewide in terms of disproportionate commitment. So it starts out oftentimes as a fight in a hallway or, Cheerios on the floor. But once you're in the juvenile justice system, if you get put on probation, say that's a minor consequence, but you violate your probation, that typically puts you into the system, Mr. Turnage, that you're very familiar
Absolutely.
with. So, a lot of kids, who committed minor crimes, and you would think that it wouldn't lead to much, end up in facilities, and the damage is cumulative.
So the recidivism rate starts to increase.
Exactly. Oh, roughly, yes.
I would
go ahead, man.
I pulled out the report, and there are 2 points at the strategy level from the discipline committee that I think are worth noting. First, review community-based reportable offenses and amend regulations to be consistent with the Maryland State Department of Education model policy. And there's 12 specific changes listed for
Right.
community-based reportable events.
Right.
And then a strategic recommendation to examine the role of the SROs through student surveys, and a revision of the memorandum of understanding with the Anne Arundel County Police Department to exclude engagement in disciplinary matters that are prescribed in the Code of Conduct within the purview of the school administration. I believe that's the basis of one of the bills in front of the legislation now to exclude SROs for participation in enforcement of school policy.
Thank you, Mary.
The problem is that they're not supposed to be doing that now. You know,
it's 6:52. Let me get ready to
I'm
wrap
sorry.
up. So I'm going to give you guys, everybody's going to get 2 minutes to be able to speak their piece. We lost Harold, unfortunately, but I'm sure he would be happy to hear about the student surveys that you mentioned being an important piece on that. And so I just wanted to start off with Ellen, Ms. Goodman-Duffy, if you want to give us your parting thoughts or final thoughts on our initial discussion. Hopefully we can continue this again next week or sometime in the future.
I mean, I hope so. I mean, I think, you know, I think that everyone's heart is in the right place, and including in these bills. And, you know, but we need to really look at what's happened. I mean, I think Anisha said it earlier. The rules as they exist tell the SROs that they're not supposed to get involved in disciplinary matters. But because they're there, because disciplinary matters are the ones that turn into crimes that you can be charged with, that's what happens. So you have to look at sort of the practicalities of it. And you know, I think yeah, despite what we'd all like to see happen, we have to look at how it really plays out in human terms in actual school situations. And in general, I think that, you know, it's been going in a bad direction for youth in general, and particularly for Black and Brown youth. And that's longstanding. So that's sort of my position. I deal with it on a person by person basis, but it breaks my heart to see kids shoved into that pipe, and then, you know, what happens when they come out the other end.
Thank you. Raleigh.
Yes. Well, one of the things that we did not speak of tonight in this conversation was the fact that 90% of the disciplinary offenses that take place are determined by usually an assistant principal in the school, who may be there and just says to the resource officer, do what the law says and not worry about anything else. And I'll just do the paperwork. And then, you know, he starts the process and the kid goes in the system. Unfortunately, as we know, once this happens, it becomes a cycle that usually doesn't stop. It just becomes worse and worse and worse. When these kids actually go into a juvenile system, they're not getting the same quality of education that they would normally get in a regular public school. And in fact, if they're out of their county jurisdiction, wherever they are sent, they're going to be given the curriculum used in that particular subdivision, wherever that location, that facility is located. So that changes everything. So this kid's going to, if he gets out of it and goes back to school, he's going to be behind the 8 ball right from the start. So he's walking in with a deficit. There's nothing stopping him from going back into the cycle again to getting into other things that's going to keep him in this cycle of juvenile offenses till he graduates to a point where he's out of the normal age for juveniles, and then he's an adult age, and he gets charged as an adult and he goes into the regular system. So I guess my point is, we have to take a holistic approach to how we handle this whole juvenile situation with these kids. SROs have to be properly trained. That's why I mentioned in the very first statement that I made is, how are they selected? Number one, how are they selected? What type of mentality are these people bringing into the situation? Are they child friendly? I mean, you know, that's a big question in my mind. And number two, how well does the school administration work side by side with the SROs and utilize the resources that are available to them, such as mental health, social services, and the like. These things are not being done as they should be done. If all of these things are holistically done as they should be done, you would see a 75 to 85% reduction in juvenile recidivism and the intake in these kids into the juvenile system completely. So we really have to take this whole big picture and break it down into little snippets to the point that everybody is assigned their unique role and how they collectively come together to resolve the issues for these juveniles. Otherwise, the system is going to continue to perpetuate itself, and the kids are going to get lost in the system as we know it. And then these are the kids that are committing the murders and the other crimes in the communities at some point. And if you trace it all back to these kids once they're locked up, 90% of them, like I said, had IEPs when they were in school, meaning they were in special education. Many of them had situations at home that had they been addressed earlier, that could have prevented these kids from going in the pipeline to begin with. But because nobody's taking that kind of an interest in these kids, they really want to drill down to find out what's going on with these kids in terms of their family dynamics, their socioeconomic status.
Yes, sir.
They're not dealing with any of this stuff.
Yes.
So
yes.
when they finally realize what's really up and how they really need to approach this situation, you'll see results. But then you're not going to see it as long as people give lip service.
That sounds like a campaign speech that I like it. We're gonna get Miss Monisha in here to get the final word. And I really appreciate you guys, and I'm glad that we all were able to participate. And Monisha, I'm gonna let you go ahead and finish it up.
Thanks so much. So I think we all agree that the model as it is causing some real harm, right? It's resulting in arrest of kids for minor behaviors. That's the vast majority of our school arrests in Maryland and in Anne Arundel County. It's disproportionately resulting in the arrest of Black children and children with disabilities. It's arresting kids with disabilities for behaviors related to their disabilities. And it is not addressing any of the root causes, as Mr. Turner just mentioned, of any of their behaviors of concern. So I think we're all in agreement here that the model as it is causing some real harm. So I think then as a community, as a society, we've got to ask ourselves, why are we hanging on to the model, right? So if the reason is the idea that we need it for school safety, we need it to prevent the mass shootings, we got to come back to the research that's looked at this over the course of 40 years. And it's just not found that effect. So I'll just give you a couple quotes. A study sponsored by FEMA, summarized accumulating research, which shows that the presence of school resources has no measurable effect in preventing school shootings or reducing casualties. A study out of Hamline University just last week, February 16th, found that the presence of armed school resource officers was actually associated with an increase in casualties associated with school shootings. And a study of 3,000 schools nationwide found, quoting here, no evidence suggesting that SRO or other sworn law enforcement contribute to school safety. And I could quote you more, but that's, so if it's the safety concern, which of course is one that we all share, we've got to just recognize that this tool isn't working to address that concern. If the concern instead is we need mentors and counselors and positive role models for our students, of course we do. Everyone here would agree we need all of those types of people in our kids' lives. But then we've got to ask ourselves the question, why should it be a police officer in a child's school, where a child, by the way, has no choice about whether they're going there, right? Why is that the right person? If what we want for our kids is counseling, shouldn't we look to those folks whose profession is to counsel or to do social work, who are not compromised by an obligation to turn around and enforce the law, even as those kids they are mentoring and counseling. So I think we really need to figure out it. And I'll just close by saying there's some models of some districts, and I'm sure in a follow-up conversation, we can talk about this more, that have taken out their SROs, and they've been thriving without them for, the past 3-4 years. No spike in violence, no, decreases in arrests, decreases in suspensions. So so there's a way to do it another way.
Yes, thank you. And we definitely know that there are other ways of providing discipline and models in school that can help young people and teachers and principals have effective school learning environments that can breed positive results. I just wanted to say the other thing that many of us need to recognize is that, as Mr. Turner said, this is a socioeconomic issue as well. And from my perspective, the 13th Amendment, which allows slavery for those who may have committed a crime, is the foundation of this problem, where we have banned slavery for everything else, but there's a police force everywhere that is gaining power that can impose a racialized slavery on even the youngest of child based on that exception in the 13th Amendment. And they've been using it since the days of Reconstruction to come after children and put children in jails, put children on work lines, and use that as the basis for demonizing and creating a criminal image of Black youth and Black men specifically, through Jim Crow with George Stinney and the various other cases that involved people being accused of crimes that they didn't commit. He's a 14-year-old killed by the state of South Carolina. We have through mass incarceration, where we saw the rise of the so-called super predator that was used to demonize Black youth and paint the whole generation, which really I learned about police through the DARE program. And they were brought into my schools in Atherton Elementary School in Howard County. And so this, reimposition by a certain specific institution of itself into the educational atmosphere is where I come from in this position. So I definitely want to see things changed at a foundational level. And I think that we all need to recognize, I don't think that everyone involved in the institution thinks about themselves as being agents of slavery, but that unfortunately, there are some who do participate in that institution of policing in order to reimpose their racist beliefs that we see constantly, and we just experienced for the last 4 years, being reimposed on Black youth, Black children, Black mothers. And I think that we have an opportunity to make a change so that we don't have to continue experiencing this. Our current president himself had a major role in the mass incarceration of Black youth, and he has the opportunity to make a change himself. And so we all need to be able to gather up our confidence, gather up our community, and push for a change. And hopefully we can do that in this legislative session. And it's also a lifelong commitment for many of us as well. So I think that, Black people have been engaged in survival in America since 1619, and we will continue to do so. And I appreciate you guys getting involved, and I appreciate all of this conversation. And like I said, hopefully we can continue to do this in the future. Thank you so much.